Several Halloweens ago, I remember that there was this mass craze about people who were suddenly dressing up as clowns and going around and terrorizing the people in their neighborhood and their surrounding areas. The thought of it always troubled me personally. After all, there were sightings in just the next city to me, which was creepy to think about. And these sorts of things can spread quite rapidly once the media gets their story-driven fingers around it. Not to mention that I'm deathly afraid of clowns, ever since I went to an old friend's birthday party back when I was around 5 or 6 years old. But that's a story for another time. I remember my sister was also equally, if not more so terrified than I was at the thought of suddenly bumping into one of these clowns in the middle of the street. I think the whole thing that started that was because of that scary clown film that was being released in the cinemas around the same time. I can't really tell if it did more damage than good to the film's reception and the revenue, or whether it actually helped to promote it in some sick, twisted way. But it was doing more than terrorizing people, myself and my sister included. It had also started to affect people's lives. Now I understand if this was just a one-off thing on the night of Halloween, I'd get that. But at least for me, I started to take more precautions. Make sure I always had my phone on my person, at full charge if I could. And if I ever had to call the police, it'd be right there and ready. Make sure I go out with at least one other person for safety. Never go out after dark, and never ever go to Halloween parties or clubbing. I just dread the thought of having to walk home drunk and be face to face with a stranger in a clown costume. One of the most distinctive memories I can recall about these clowns is when I was scrolling and seeing posts on Facebook and social media. Actual first-hand accounts of sightings of these clowns. One of which in particular stuck in my mind. A woman and her family scared half to death at the sight of a clown in their very own back garden. Not really doing anything besides just standing there very still and staring at the family inside the house. To put you in the picture, as much as I can recall the memories of the video I saw, it seemed like it was your average British back garden. It was just a large square patch of grass with flowers going all around the edge of the garden, with a 6-foot wooden fence all around the property, an old brown shed right in the far corner, and a light sandy colored patio just outside from the back door where the family was staring back at the clown. Whoever was in the costume had somehow scaled over the massive 6-foot fence and was almost half hidden, half visible still, in the bushes right at the back of the garden, without even alerting the family inside that he or she was there. I'm just going to say he because the proportions of the clown appeared quite broad and masculine. It looked like he was trying to purposefully do a bad job at hiding though. Kind of like he wanted whoever was inside the house to know he was standing there. The thing I find creepy though is that the fact that no one actually knows just how long the clown was lurking for. He could have been outside in their garden for ages, just standing in place, smiling, just waiting until the family inside the home came to innocently look outside of their living room window to see him standing there. The thing that creeped me out the most was that the creepy quality of the video. It was probably no greater than 360p, and the person filming couldn't hold the camera still to save his life. That I can understand though. I'd be doing the same thing, if not worse, at the job of holding the camera. Especially holding the camera still. The thing that made it eerie though was it felt like some found footage, like Paranormal Activity or the Blair Witch Project. The less I talk about those films, the better. What I'm trying to say is that this homemade recorded video that showed the situation at hand, yet it kept it suspenseful of what was about to happen. You couldn't see the close details of the clown, however you could see his distinctive classic outfit that was being worn. A clearly shot-bought fake and bushy red wig, powdered white face, an apparent false red nose, and one of those baggy white clown outfits with big red pom-poms as pretend buttons. What you were able to make out about the face, though, was his mouth. Clearly had gone to town with the red body paint around his lips and cheeks, and the thought did cross my mind of, what if it's actually blood and not paint around his mouth? Surely not. That stuff's just in the movies, right? Still, it made me terrified for the family who were recording him inside their home. I remember seeing the comments on this Facebook post, typically youths commenting about how it's obviously fake and that if the clown showed up at their garden, they'd beat the 7 bells of, well, you know where I'm going with this. Another posted video I saw the same year that comes to mind was a video someone took inside a McDonald's when a clown was standing outside the fast food restaurant and holding a silver-looking kitchen knife as they were looking into the premises. Almost like they were picking out the customers inside as if they were on the menu and not the food. But those are just a couple of many clown videos that I can remember that are just off the top of my head, especially the ones that I saw that particular year alone. But I know there were more. Much, much more. It was so bad people were calling the police to come and deal with them. I know most of them were probably just youths in makeup wanting to scare the public, but I always had that what if in the back of my mind. What if one of them wasn't a youth? What if one of them were carrying a real knife? And what if they truly did have sinister intentions? Could I become a victim of a real-life horror story? Nah, surely not. That's not how I want my life to end. But what if? For years now, every night from my first day of October, I anxiously peered through my curtains, terrified of finding someone in my own back garden. Just praying to God that no one ever does the same thing to me. I must have only been about 3 months into my career of being a police officer when I experienced the most terrifying night of my life. It was around the start of October time when I paid a visit to a vulnerable elderly lady. We had a report made to us that there was banging heard coming from inside the lady's property in the early hours of the morning. For legal reasons like data protection, I'm not allowed to say her name, so let's just call her Marlene. Marlene lives alone in one of those old white painted cottages with a straw-like roof, which was in the middle of those sorts of villages that you'd never ever heard of before. The kind that seemed quite peaceful to live in at a glance, or if you were just passing through, but you could tell that the community was closely knit together, the type that would keep secrets and not be too welcoming of new neighbors. Funny enough, the person who reported the concern to us regarding Marlene was just someone who was passing through the village, so it does make me wonder if Marlene's neighbors were privy to what was going on and chose not to report it. When I first paid a visit to Marlene at her home address with my tutoring officer Mark, she seemed a little hesitant to let us into her home. Now, I was still a rookie cop, and although I was around 25 years old at the time, I had no real-life experience. I felt a little overwhelmed by the job, so I was truly thankful that Mark was there with me. If he wasn't there, then I wouldn't have picked up and seen the signs of Marlene's body language, which, after looking back now, she was clearly hiding something. Mark reassured Marlene that we were attending purely on a concern point of view, and that she wasn't in any sort of trouble at all. Strangely, though, this only seemed to make Marlene even more nervous and hesitant to allow us inside her home. She had the door unlocked ajar, but she had one of those small chain bolts on her door, so she could be able to peek through and see who was at her front door. I don't remember exactly what Marlene said to us, but she said something along the lines of, No, I don't need any help. Go away! Go away!" I felt so sorry for her. I wanted to help her so badly in whatever way that we could in a professional capacity as officers. She shut the door right in front of mine and Mark's faces. I walked further around her property and saw a ground floor window. There I could peer into her living room. I tried to pull up on the lip of the window, but it was locked, so I pressed my hands and face right up against the glass so that I was able to see inside. Against the light shining down from the sun, I wasn't able to see much. Although it was daylight, it was one of those addresses that was very dark inside. It seemed apparent that there was barely any natural light piercing into the property, so where it almost seemed derelict. I know this is a random thing I picked up, but one thing I did notice about the inside was that there was no light bulb, which I think was one of the reasons as to why it was so dark. Before I could see anything else, a shadow came forward, making me jump out of my skin. I soon laughed at myself in my head, though, when I realized it was just Marlene. Again, you couldn't really see much through the glass window, but I just remembered this expression on her face as if I had intruded into her privacy. Before I could even say anything to her, she drew her dark, blood-red curtains shut right in front of my face. It was at this point that I realized Marlene wasn't going to let us in willfully, so I walked back around to the front door where Mark was still trying to reason with Marlene by talking to her through the letterbox. And you guessed it, Mark was given the cold shoulder. We had a legal power to force entry into her home, but we really didn't want to force our way in and break the elderly lady's door down by force. That wouldn't feel right for me. It would just make the situation a whole lot more stressful for everyone there. But we were running out of options. Mark and I tried so many various things to try to get in, like making attempts to speak to her next of kin, looking for a key safe outside of the house, and even trying to reason further with Marlene. To our surprise, Marlene was the last member of her family. She had no children, never married. Her only sibling was her older sister, who had unfortunately passed away in the last 12 months. So it's safe to say that she was completely and utterly alone in the world. Mark radioed our sergeant, who told us to force entry to ensure Marlene was safe and well. Not that we needed it, but sometimes it's just nicer to have that support from a supervision from time to time. After all, we only had seen her frail and humped over peering through an 1.5-inch gap of the ajar front door, so we didn't have enough presented to us to show us that Marlene was well and capable of looking after herself. Not to mention the banging that had been reported to us. Who knows who else could be in her home? Mark shouted through Marlene's letterbox one final time, asking her to come back and open the front door. We got no response from her. We didn't even know where she had gone to. She just wandered off somewhere in her home. I remember looking at Mark and him giving me this serious look. Mark and I still hadn't known each other that long by this point, but still, I had never seen Mark this suspicious and concerned for someone before. Something was definitely wrong and off. It wasn't just a simple concerned report. At this point in time, I think Mark and I had been outside the property for around 20 to 30 minutes, but it felt so much longer than that. I was already freezing. My fingertips and toes felt like ice cubes, and what made it worse is that it had started to rain. A couple of local residents were walking by the property on the road, looking at what we were doing. Again, it felt like one of those eerie villages. I recall one of the passerbys shaking his head and quickly looking away, and another who muttered something under his breath, but I couldn't hear what it was. And at the time I assumed they were just anti-police, and so wasn't too pleased to see us. But after I thought on the matter more, I realized what they were doing. At the time, though, I had more pressing concerns at hand than just snide little comments and neighbors peering into the police business. Mark booted Marlene's front door, which went with a loud bang. Suddenly we heard a cry inside the address. Then Mark kicked the door again, once again making a loud bang as he did, once more followed by some sort of cry or whimper coming from inside. Mark regained his stance and once more booted the door with his foot. This time it came with a loud crack and crunch as the door began to split, showing the wooden innards of the front door. For a wooden door, this was surprisingly sturdy. Suddenly we heard Marlene wailing, "Stop! Just stop!" as we saw a figure coming towards us through the stained glass window. Thankfully, Marlene came through. We heard her move something from behind the door and unbolting the chain as the door opened. In front of us, we saw Marlene for the first time. I think she must have been about 4.5 feet tall, hunched over with long sleeve clothing on her that looked a few sizes too large for her size. She had gray, greasy, knotted hair and looked like it hadn't been washed in months. I don't even want to know what it was, but she had dirt and small bits of what looked like leaves in her hair, like she had fallen into a pile of leaves or something. Clearly, this woman was at some level of self-neglect. Perhaps she was suffering from deep depression from the recent loss of her sister and everything she had been through. But no. As soon as Marlene had opened the door to us, this gruesome gust of rot and decay hit us hard. I never smelled anything so bad in my entire life. I didn't want to go in, but I know we had to. The entrance of the property was this bad, then what was the rest of the inside like? Marlene walked back into the rest of the home as me and Mark entered through the front door. Mark noticed the front door had no doorknob or key lock on the inside, and instead had some sort of heavy wooden stool shoved next to it, which I can only assume was why the door was so difficult to force open in the first place. All this meant that the property couldn't be locked from the inside, only the outside. I'm trying to recall my training for the signs of neglect and such, but in the moment I was too preoccupied with what was right in front of me, my mind drew a blank. As we made our way through the hallway, we saw to our left was a door to the kitchen, and on our right was the living room where Marlene had wandered off into. The smell only got worse as we got further in and started to notice black mold in the corners and ceilings. Glancing over the kitchen wasn't a pretty sight either. Old food on the kitchen side and a yellowed tiled floor covered in grime. Dirty dishes scattered all over the place. For an elderly skinny lady, this was sure a lot of food to waste. This whole mess screamed hoarder to me. Perhaps this is why Marlene closed the curtains on me outside. Was she simply ashamed of her living conditions, or was there something more at hand and we were just not seeing yet? It got much worse as we went further in. To see Marlene hunched over, sitting on the couch, almost rocking back and forth. Mark and I sat down and tried to have a conversation with her. I won't bore you with the unnecessary details of what was said, but the more we spoke to her, the more concerning it became. She had opened her curtains again at this point, which was now another thing I realized looking back. To think all this time I thought she was slightly off mentally, but she actually was very smart and knew what was going on. She kept looking through the window to the outside as if she was expecting a guest to arrive. The look you give when you're expecting someone and you're constantly peering out the window to see if they'll be on time or not. After speaking with Marlene for some time, Mark got up and started to walk outside so he could once again have the private conversation on the radio with our sergeant. Till Mark spotted something before he left. In the corner of one of the stairs, just poking out enough for the clutter for him to see, was a used needle. I recall Mark suddenly turning around, looking at me, and then looking back. I looked back at Marlene and I knew what Mark had just seen. Mark turned back around and went outside to the front garden. I can only imagine what he had just witnessed completely changed the conversation he had with our sergeant. A few moments went by when Marlene started to cough and hurl over as if she was in pain. I reached out asking if she was okay, but she just blanked me as if I wasn't even there. Then suddenly she looked up to me, directly into my eyes, and asked me something that sent chills down my spine, even to this very day. She asked me, "Are you a real police officer?" I asked her what she meant by that, showing her my officer ID as some sort of reassurance for her. I was so stunned at what she had just asked me, so I tried to probe further questions at her, but she went quiet again. At this point, Mark had re-entered the property and saw another patrol car pulling up outside Marlene's address next to the car we arrived in. It was our sergeant. What I was told next by Mark and James about what they believed was going on really made me anxious, so I think I must have had some rush of adrenaline or something because the details get slightly vague. But I remember my sergeant coming to the property with Mark. For the record, by the way, my sergeant is called James. James told me he wanted to speak to Marlene alone and told me and Mark to go and make sure the property was safe and secure upstairs. It felt like it took us a couple of good minutes to scale the stairs because on almost every single step up to the first floor had some sort of obstacle we had to step over, be it pieces of trash, small items of furniture, picture frames, shoes, shoe boxes, shopping bags. After finally getting to the top of the stairs, I remember standing on the landing, and let me just say, the smell only got worse. So did the appearance of the property. Wallpaper peeling away, even more black mold, open plug sockets, and what looked like holes dented into the walls. I could go on about the rest of the rooms we saw, like the bathroom and the bedroom, but I don't think you need me to describe those settings to you. For anyone, this was an extremely dangerous property to live in. Mark went and searched the rooms at one side of the property as I searched the other half. There wasn't much more to note that I haven't already told you besides from what I ended up finding in the bedroom drawers. It shocked me to my core. Either this was a very dangerous elderly lady or there was more going on. When I pulled open the drawer, I found about a dozen or so old Nokia-type brick mobile phones and a roll of cash encased in a rubber band. Moving these aside, I found the most horrifying part of it. Inside this drawer was what I looked like an empty ammo clip for a handgun. I signaled Mark, who had signaled James, to come up and check out what I had uncovered. Within only a short period of time, we had more officers on the scene helping with our investigation, some of whom had taken Marlene to the hospital for a checkup. When James was speaking to her, he found out that under her oversized clothing, she had severe bruising and wounds to her body that she kept concealed from us. At the hospital, she was also treated for malnourishment and dehydration. From inside came a loud shout that said, "Police, get out here now!" which came from one of our new arriving officers on the scene. They had spotted a figure lurking in some bushes spying on what we were doing. Suddenly the figure darted out of the bushes and down the street. As soon as they realized they had been spotted, they didn't get far before the person running was detained and arrested. Turned out Marlene was a victim of cuckooing, which, if you don't know what it is when a criminal pretends they're in need of some help, like that they've been evicted or that they're homeless and such. And then someone innocent, Marlene in this case, takes pity on them and brings them inside their home for a short period of time to get them back on their feet. This is never the case with cuckooing, though. And it always ends up the same way, where the criminal doesn't move out and slowly begins to take control over the property and exerts controlling behavior over the victim in their own house, with threats, acts of violence, and abuse. A common theme with cuckooing, with which Marlene fell victim to, was the way criminals take away their ID cards and control their finances. When they have control over their victims, they turn their own household into a criminally run enterprise, where they run their crime gang operations such as drug production and many more horrific crimes. Essentially, they turn a caring, clean, tidy, and loving home into one of the worst that you can imagine. The criminals also sort of brainwash the victim into making them think that they are accomplices and that if they call the police, they'll be arrested and go to jail, which is never the case for the victim, but it's just a scare tactic that they use. After the other officers turned up and began searching the property thoroughly, we found over $30,000 of cash, around $50,000 worth of drugs, and numerous amounts of weapons that I think is better for your own peace of mind that I don't mention. The rest of the investigation lasted months that went to another investigation department. After all, it was a case far too complicated for the average officer to be in charge of. Although I didn't get to be privy to the rest of the case, I know the general outcome of what occurred. The person who was spying on us was in fact the criminal who had invaded Marlene's home in the first place. He must have seen all the police cars on the road and realized what was going on. The whole situation was run by an organized crime gangs who had terrorized many of the residents in the same village with threats of violence and abuse. So it wasn't just Marlene that was a victim in this case. I think this is why no one in the village had reported any of this to us, because they were too scared for their own personal safety. As I said before, Marlene had no offspring of their own, and any income that she ever earned was saved into her bank accounts. When Marlene's sister passed away, she had inherited her will and all of her life savings. All this made Marlene the perfect target for the crime. Despite how bad these events were, I am pleased to say that this does in fact have a happy ending. Marlene was restored to health by the hospital care and given daily support from services who helped her restore her home to the proud and tidy state that it was. The members of the village who had been affected by this were also given support as things got back to some sort of normality. I'm glad to say that Marlene lived out the rest of her years being both happy and healthy. This whole case shed light on criminal gangs who were arrested, prosecuted, and sent to prison for a long time. My therapist told me that to help me get over my troubles, I need to talk about it more. So here I go. I'm just your average 17-year-old guy. I was new to town, and in my first semester of college in the middle of October studying filmography, when my class had been given our first assignment to create a short film in 2 weeks ready for Halloween. Now we had the choice to either work alone, in pairs, or as a group. Most of my class had already grouped themselves into 3 or 4, but I decided to work on my own anyways. I was always the type of guy that would get picked last for the team anyway, so I figured I'd save myself the embarrassment of it and just work alone. I'm more of an introvert anyhow. It wasn't until a girl in my class who I had not spoken with a whole lot yet approached me and offered to work with me. I was taken aback a bit because I actually had a bit of a crush on this girl. She was called Emma, who was sort of an introvert herself, like me. Emma seemed mysterious to me. She had dyed shoulder-length purple hair and dressed somewhat gothic, which I actually liked. You probably won't be surprised to know that I accepted her offer to work with me. Our film had to be Halloween themed. I wanted to just make a 3D animation film about a creepy story. However, Emma wanted something that was a lot more real. I remember when she pitched her idea to me for our short film, to which she said, "What if we make one of those scary found footage horrors?" I think my mouth must have gone dry due to the nerves as I tried to swallow at the thought of what Emma had just suggested to me. A couple of days went by, to which we had been in almost constant non-stop communication by phone with Emma, who was sending me possible locations we could use to film. I felt like I was winning in life. I had my college crush chasing me. But then again, I wasn't all that on board with her idea either, because her found footage horror always gave me the creeps. Eventually, I gave in and agreed with her idea, which led us up to meeting one weekend around 4 p.m. near a large woodland. We had just a couple hours before it went dark, to which Emma told me that this was the perfect time to film it. Emma didn't tell me much about the story she had planned, as she wanted my performance to seem genuine, other than that we would be friends exploring and getting lost in a haunted woods. The thought of sitting at my desk taking on this project alone with just my 3D animation skills seemed too distant and too good to be true now. Why did I agree to this in the first place? I had my phone, a head flashlight, and a camera with me. Emma brought the same gear too, but also a map and some essential supplies in her rucksack. We began to record some test footage that we walked into the woods, make sure the cameras were set up correctly and such. Felt like we weren't really accomplishing much. We were just walking through the woods, talking to each other about how our weekend had gone so far, and bitching about our classmates behind their backs. But by this point it had started to get dark, so we put our flashlights on. I started to worry and scare myself if there was anything else in these woods nearby, like homeless, teenage gangs, or drug addicts. I didn't have long to think about my fears as I heard a branch break followed by a low grunt-like sound. I turned around as fast as a bullet to see Emma tripped over on the ground. Once I helped her to her feet, it became apparent she was injured herself around her hip area, making her walk the rest of the way with a limp. I'd love to have been her hero and carry her out of the spooky forest, but let's be honest, I'd have just embarrassed myself. I'm not the strongest person for my age. Emma was slim-built, but carrying anyone in an hour-long hike through the darkness in the woods would be difficult and exhausting work for anyone, let alone myself. Despite her injury, Emma seemed more worried about all the dirt she just had on her clothes, so we tried to get the dirt off as much as we could. It was now completely dark, with a little light shining through the trees. As we began pacing back and forth, it came to our realization that we had lost the trail from where we came from. Every which way looked identical. We were definitely lost. I tell Emma enough is enough and we need to take care of her injury, so I make the decision to reach into my pocket and take out my phone to ring for help. I pat myself down and my phone is gone. I tell myself I must have lost it somewhere in the woods. Emma was sat down in some sort of stone formation at the point resting, and she asked me to reach into her rucksack and her back and take out her phone so that she could call for help instead of me. But she had a dead battery. So at the very least, we couldn't even use her own phone to call my phone so we could find it and hopefully retrace our steps back to the entrance of the woods. As I put Emma's phone back into her rucksack, I noticed one textbook catching my attention. I don't remember the title, but it was something along the lines of Local Paranormal Ghouls and Mysteries. I asked Emma if she had an interest in the paranormal personally or if it was just for the project, but to my surprise she seemed to get slightly elusive to my questions. It felt like a couple long hours had gone by at this point as we traversed the woods. I supported Emma on my shoulder, taking as much of the weight off her walking as I could. We walked for what felt like miles until Emma once again fell to the ground, shrieking in pain. I try to keep her as steady as I can. She was crying profusely in pain and started weeping that the makeup she had applied was smearing all over her face. Now I could not really see her ruined makeup, which she was so obsessed with because of how dark it was, but I'm sure she would have looked just as beautiful even with it all messed up. All I cared about was her well-being at this point. She lies on the floor, still weeping. She starts to apologize to me for something she did, but to tell you the truth, I can't make out what she's trying to say due to her wailing. I just tell her not to worry, and I try my best as I can to reassure her that we'll get home soon. Then she takes a deep breath and recomposes herself and tells me that the textbook in her bag is one of many local mysteries and paranormal events that remain unsolved, one of which relates to the woods we're in. After what Emma told me next, I didn't even want to read what was in the book. Emma informed me that the woods were well known for local paranormal mystery, and that she herself was an aspiring ghost hunter, which is why she applied to the filmography course, hoping one day she could be on a ghost hunting TV program, and that she thought filming here might give the people of the world some insight to what was happening. Despite how afraid I was at the time, I once again tried my best to comfort her, but I was met with her doing a 1,000-yard stare right behind me, stuttering, I'm so sorry. I turned around to see nothing but dark woodlands behind me, but from the look on her face I could tell she was genuinely terrified for her life, like she had just seen something behind me. From behind Emma comes this insanely loud and inhuman shriek that I can't really describe in words, nor would I be able to recreate it. But let me tell you, it put the fear of God in me. People don't lie when they say you get superhuman strength in a survival situation, because what I do next truly surprises both of us. I quickly scoop my hands underneath Emma, pick her up in my arms, and sprint as fast as I can through the forest. I have no idea if I was going the right way or not, but wherever I was going fast. I sprint for what must have been a few minutes, but all the woodland looks the same. Eventually I reached a small clearing and we saw lights in the distance. Finally, we had reached the safety of civilization. After all, since when do monsters from the woods ever enter public spaces? I sprint through what was left of the woods until we reach town. The first place we see open is a cafe, which we enter out of pure safety. The cafe was open late due to the local Halloween parties that occurred every weekend of October, for people to come and relax, enjoy a cup of coffee, in case they needed a peaceful break away from the parties, which is a good business idea if you ask me. There were Halloween decorations all over the cafe and a couple of life-size skeletons in both corners near the tables and chairs. I set Emma down at one of the tables and grabbed her a spare chair for her to rest her leg on, hopefully relieve some of the pain, but she tells me she's somehow suddenly feeling better now. A waitress in witch costume comes over to our table and asks if she can help us. I know that if I told her we weren't actually ordering that she'd expect us to leave, so I just asked her to bring us 2 coffees. I turn back to Emma and reach my arm out to support her. Emma just sits there with her head in her hands, again having a 1,000-yard stare on her face. What she tells me next was truly terrifying to hear. I faked it, she said. I turn my head and ask her what she meant by that. Emma goes on to tell me that the local tales of the woods she just went into are indeed rumors in the town. However, going into the woods, falling over, injuring herself, and getting lost, all part of her screenplay for our film project. And that by her not telling me about this, as she said before, would make the acting more realistic. This whole time Emma was just acting in front of our cameras, and because I believed the night events had been genuine, all my body language was genuine too, and gave the impression that this was a true found footage film. Emma went on and told me that she planned for us to go further into the woods, hear a shriek from a creature in the tales, and then we can get taken out off camera, as the rest of the footage would just be the camera rolling in one position, capturing the noise and movements of whatever killed us roaming around until the camera storage either became full and stopped recording or until the battery died. At some point, Emma stated that she would have waited for an opportunity such as one of us taking a bathroom break in the middle of the dark, creepy woods, or would have briefly walked away as she planted a loudspeaker connection to her Bluetooth that would play a demonic shriek. Of course, Emma's phone was never out of battery. She had just turned it off before she met me at the start of the afternoon. I just respected her privacy too much that I wouldn't have gone through pressing keys on her phone. I think Emma knew this about me. I asked Emma why we never ran further into the woods to film our off-screen deaths, but before she can answer, the waitress returns bringing us both our coffees. For the first time, I grasp the warmth of the mug after being out in the cold for so long. I start to laugh and say to Emma, "Wow, you really got me good." No one had ever pulled a prank on me like this before, so credit where credit's due, I guess. I start to sip my coffee, almost burning my mouth on the hot beverage as I look across to see Emma still holding her head in her hands. Ask her to cheer up. After all, she had set out what she wanted to do and got our film footage. All I have left to do is the magic of post-production editing and submitting our Halloween film to our college tutor. Emma looks up at me for the first time, her face pure white in fear as she says to me in the horrifying words of, "I never got the opportunity to plant the speaker. Whatever or whoever made that shriek was real." Not realizing we both still had our camera rolling, we drank our coffees and go back to our house to process what had actually happened that night. The weeks passed as we submitted our film. We had no other footage or any other ideas for a different film, especially considering we both had just been through. We didn't feel up for anything else. Thankfully, we got top marks on our assignment. I'm sure if I had done an acting course, I'd also have top marks on my acting. Maybe Emma's original plan had some merit to it. As time went on, I kept in touch with Emma as we tried to delve into further mysteries and try to uncover what went on in those woods that night. Was there a person stalking us through those woods? Or was there a real creature there? Both are equally terrifying. We never returned to the woods to this day, but maybe, just maybe, there's more to this world than we're not capable or perhaps not ready to understand.